All right, so welcome everybody. I'm super excited to be introducing the person and the place for tonight's talk. The person, Maggie Marks, and the place, the Garden for the Environment, both came at a really pivotal time in my life. They each helped form a piece of what I've become, and they both hold a really dear place in my heart. Maggie is a mother and a wife, and she's lived in San Francisco for most of her life. She's worked for over 20 years with nonprofits, and she got involved with the Garden for the Environment because of her passion for food. When she got interested, she started working on some farms and ended up becoming the program director for the garden, and that's when I met her. Over time, she's become the executive director, and she's just been rocking it out and making the garden an awesome place to be at. The garden itself is a nonprofit in the heart of San Francisco, and it has a great mission that is aimed at inspiring and educating people on everything gardening and composting and all sorts of great activities that urban gardeners can learn and look forward to. So without further ado, I'll let Maggie take it away.
Thank you so much, Cody. It's so nice to hear your voice after so long. Cody, I've had the pleasure of working with thousands of volunteers and hundreds of interns at this point, and Cody is forever and will always be one of my favorites, even after all these years. He's the best. My name is Maggie Marks, and I'm the director of Garden for the Environment. We're San Francisco's teaching garden. And I'm really excited to share with you some of our approach to education, our approach to community work, and when thinking about how I could connect with you all that are in a really different part of the country and can't physically be in the garden, I thought I'd take you on a little tour of this space, and through the tour of this space, it can kind of be a lens on our programming, and then tell you more about what those programs look like. So that's my plan. As Cody mentioned, I've been involved with the garden for a long time. I grew up in the same neighborhood that the garden is in. I'm a fourth generation San Franciscan. I actually moved out of the city 2.5 years ago with my family. We have 2 little kids that you hopefully don't, but might hear in the background at some point. It's dinner time in California. And so we moved up north. I still work in the garden and commute in on Saturdays, which is a really lovely way for me to stay connected to the city I grew up in and the community I grew up in, while being able to live in an area where I can have a big garden that we weren't able to have in the Bay Area. So I started working at the garden in 2000 and what year is it? 2012. I was hired as like a 6-month role to fill in while a program manager went on maternity leave. At that point, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my career. I was in my late 20s, but I also was really excited about the opportunity of working for Garden for the Environment. My background was in human rights work. I did a lot of organizing, community organizing, political organizing, but also really had this strong connection to land and to food, and was kind of trying to figure out a way to marry those 2 things together. And I really thought that Garden for the Environment would be sort of like a temporary stopping point before I figured out what I was like really actually going to do with my life. And then after being the program manager for 4.5 years, which I loved. I loved designing programs. I loved working with teachers, and I'll tell you more about what that looks like. I really liked that work. And then our executive director left and tapped me to be the next director. And he gave me 2 weeks notice. So I had to say yes. It wasn't really an option. And I really thought that also was going to be a temporary role. I had never wanted to do the fundraising financial piece of being the director of a nonprofit. And then after doing the job for a while, realized I absolutely loved it. I love managing people. I love working with staff. And I find my job to find what their strengths and gifts are and support them while they bring that to their role. And I love doing that. I also have loved fixing things, big and small. Small nonprofits are really difficult to run. Funding and finances are really challenging. And I've really enjoyed figuring out where all of the kinks are, where all the tough parts are in running our organization and figuring out ways to make them run better, more smoothly in a way that is always in response to our mission. So I've really loved my job. I feel very, very privileged to be able to do this work and to run what is very much a historic organization in San Francisco. So I'm going to share my screen and tell you a little bit more about us and take you around the garden a bit. So the first thing I did when I became the director was I got a very large yellow sign painted for outside of our garden. So we are a physical space in San Francisco. A lot of organizations that do similar to work to ours have either multiple sites or maybe are educational but aren't so rooted in space. We are a physical garden site, and we are in a relatively busy neighborhood of San Francisco. I'm going to show you on a map. But people don't know about us, and we're the best, what we joke that we're the best kept secret in San Francisco, although that was never our intention. So I got a large yellow sign painted by a local sign painter as one of the first things that I did to kind of capture people's attention, because we have so much traffic, some foot traffic and a lot of car and bus traffic near where we're located. So I was hoping that that might grab people's attention, and it does. So our mission is to teach people about the environment, which we consider to be soil, water, plants, creatures, and climate. So together we can grow a resilient, more beautiful world. I found it very interesting that SAVE was founded in the summer of 1990, as were we. We were founded in July of 1990. And really have what sounds like very similar aspirations and goals, which is we were founded to be San Francisco's public teaching garden. And I'll kind of explain our specific lens, but we are a 1/2 acre space. You can see an aerial view of our garden. And so it's very, very skinny and long. And the whole sort of like right third, where there's a lot of tree mass, that's a hill. So we're on the sort of base western side of Twin Peaks, which is this sort of large range of hills that divide San Francisco from the west to the east. We're a public space, and I'll explain a little bit more about on the site that we're located on, but we're open dawn until dusk every day of the year. We don't have staff on site every day, but it's open to the public. So really, we want to be a space that is, our goal is that the garden is our greatest teacher, and so that people can come visit, and even if we're not there, they can hopefully learn something. So, how do I move to the next slide? Oh, there we go. So this is just some like big picture stuff. Let me just make sure this was our next slide. Oh yes, I got kicked ahead. Whoa, okay. Sorry guys. Something is happening with my slideshow. Let's start here. Okay. So here is just some of our last year numbers, just to give you a sense of our sort of like size and scale and what we're doing. We taught 49 public workshops. We had about 3,000 volunteer hours. So we teach in various different ways, and we teach through workshops, and we teach through our volunteer program, which is what Cody was really involved in when he worked with us. We taught 800 youth that came through on a field trip, and 23 gardener training graduates. So they graduated from our Get Up Gardener training program, which I'll tell you more about. We harvested more than 500 pounds of organic produce and donated it to a local shelter. And we do all this with the full-time equivalent of 2.5 staff. So we actually have 4 people on payroll, and only one of them works 40 hours a week. And so, as I was kind of mentioning before this officially started, funding is just always a challenge for us as a small organization. And we're kind of running into it's like a good problem and a big challenge right now, which is that we've gotten really full, like people are really excited about what we're doing. And this has ebbed and flowed over our 34-year history. And right now we're just at a place where there's a lot of energy and excitement, and it's just challenging because we could really use more staff. And as a teaching garden, I feel like more staff would be a bigger fulfillment of our mission, because employing people is a great way to expand garden education. Our total budget is about $300,000. That was last year's budget, and we've increased it a little bit this year in order to give this position a little more hours. I've worked part-time since having kids, which has been really good for my family, and also something I can do because I've been here so long. I've been around for a really long time. But my goal to make the organization more sustainable is that this role actually needs to become a full-time role, so that someday, if I'm not the person doing it, somebody would actually be able to do the job because it's a full-time job. People always ask me where our funding comes from, and I think it's a great question. So about 45% of our money comes from local governments. Majority of that is from the people whose land we're located on, which is the Public Utilities Commission. They're the water, power, sewer company, sort of like city agency that does water, power, sewer for San Francisco. We also get funding from our Department of the Environment, from San Francisco's Department of the Environment, which I think is a really amazing city department. I know it's relatively uncommon for large cities to have a Department of the Environment, and they are very focused on a San Francisco city goal, which has been outlined in a broader city vision of making our city zero waste. And so we teach composting and support their zero waste goals. We get 16% of our funding from private foundations, which has been really the most challenging funding source for us to get money from. 10% from program fees, and then probably another 15%, which I didn't include on here, would be from individual donors. So that's people that are making gifts either through our large fall appeal campaign, which we run at the end of every year, or we have a group of monthly donors. I've worked in nonprofits for a long time and always been told that like having, a pie chart that has so much of our funding come from city government was like kind of a no-no in the world of budgeting for a nonprofit. And I've always tried to change that balance and never really been able to. And then the pandemic hit, and it turned out that having so much of our money come from city government, where budgets were already in place long before the money gets doled out, actually really helped in our favor. And so actually insulated us from having a lot of the negative financial impacts that a lot of other nonprofits felt when foundation endowments really dropped or individuals were unable to donate, because so much of our money came through the city and was already earmarked. We were really safe from having to do layoffs or anything like that. Unlike SAVE, we are not our own nonprofit. We are fiscally sponsored by Earth Island Institute, which is an organization that's based in Berkeley, but has projects all over the country that are really environmentally focused. And we moved to them just 2 years ago. And we moved for a couple of reasons. And one was our previous fiscal sponsor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a fiscal sponsor model, but it's essentially a larger organization that has projects underneath it, and those projects are small nonprofits. And we pay a percentage of all of our income to the larger organization, and they run payroll, HR, kind of all of the back-end administrative stuff. And in an ideal world, a fiscal sponsorship relationship would mean that all of the non-programmatic work that it takes running a nonprofit is handled by someone else. So those projects can really focus on the work itself and delivering the work. In reality, it's pretty messy because keeping finances straight for Earth Island has 75 projects. Our previous fiscal sponsor had about 30. It's really hard to do that. But it's been a model that's worked really well for us with the size of our budget and just we've never really, in my tenure, we haven't super explored looking into becoming our own nonprofit. Maybe you guys can convince me it's a good idea, but for now it's been really nice to sort of have a partnership and also have have relationships with a larger organization that can provide guidance or ideas, or they can review grants or all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of knowledge sharing that's been really great. Okay, let's find out how to. Okay, here we are. This is our staff. So Hillary, who's here in the orange hat, Cody, she says hi, is not actually on staff, but she is our mentor. She was a staff member for a long time. She's been involved with the garden on and off over its 33-year history, and has a lot of horticulture training, so does a lot of the sort of plant knowledge sharing with us. On the left is Trina Lopez, who manages our adult public programs. That's me next to her. Chris in the back manages our volunteer and youth programs, and Hannah on the right is our education assistant and helps with the youth programs. This was taken when we went on a adult field trip to visit Western Hills Garden, which is up in Occidental in Sonoma County, California, as a way to learn about another garden and seek inspiration and learn and see some really beautiful plants. So we had a really good time. Okay. So this is a map of San Francisco. We are the red dot. So we are located really in the middle of the city. And the garden was founded by the San Francisco League of Urban Gardeners, which was an organization that was really the large organization that ran all of the community garden programs in San Francisco, all the education gardens. And so they identified our site, which was owned by the Public Utilities Commission, as a great location to do a teaching garden. And so you can see that big, long green area is Golden Gate Park. So we're located about 4 blocks south of Golden Gate Park, and just downslope from Twin Peaks, which is this large hill in the middle of San Francisco. Let's see. Okay. Oh, and I'm missing a slide. Fun stuff. Okay, there we go. Okay, so when I was thinking about how to talk to folks from Ohio about gardening in San Francisco and explain it, I thought of this map, which I really love, and thought about what's really amazing and really unique about growing in San Francisco and just San Francisco weather in general. So there's a lot of jokes made about weather in San Francisco. There's this famous columnist from San Francisco who said the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. And that's because we are located on a peninsula with the Pacific Ocean next to us, and then the San Francisco Bay. And there is a coastal range of mountains. So there's the Sierra Nevada mountains, which are, on the eastern side of California. And those are like a large mountain range. And then there's coastal mountains along the coast of San Francisco. And the Golden Gate, which is the break between the Pacific Ocean and the San Francisco Bay, acts as a break in that mountain range. And so what happens is that fog that develops and cold air that develops on the Pacific Ocean can channel through the Golden Gate into the bay, and that cools down the whole Bay Area. Also, I'm not a meteorologist, but essentially the cool air from the Pacific Ocean with the mountain range of the Sierra Nevadas causes the hot air to essentially rise and move to the Central Valley, pulling in the cool air around the San Francisco Bay. So we have the large Golden Gate gap, but you can kind of see these other arrows, and those are other gaps in those mountain ranges that can allow that cool air to come through. And what this means practically is that San Francisco has very cool summers and very mild winters. So it has very unpredictable weather. It can be like, you can be in a t-shirt 1 second and then like half an hour later, the fog will roll in and you'll be freezing. And so we always wear lots of layers here. And it just means that we have like a really mild climate. There are a number of other places around the world with a similar climate zone to us. It's a pretty unusual situation. I think I was reading it's like 2% of land areas in the world have this summer dry climate is what it's called. For a long time, it was called a Mediterranean climate because the Mediterranean region is one of the areas that has this similar climate. But in an effort to be less Eurocentric, the language now is summer dry climate. And what that means is that unlike summer storms that you guys may have in Ohio, we do not get rain in California or in this part of California, essentially from May through October. And that is normal, even, removing factors of climate change. We have a dry summer here and we have a mild, rainier winter. How much rain we get can vary. And I think rain and water is always going to be a challenge for Californians, especially as our state grows in population. But essentially on a sort of common year, we would have a mild rainy winter with, we rarely get below freezing, and then a mild dry summer. And so other areas of the world that have this are usually on the western coast of large land areas. So there's the Mediterranean region, the western coast of Chile, western coast of South Africa, and then parts of New Zealand and Australia follow these similar weather patterns. And why that matters is because when when Garden for the Environment was founded, people in San Francisco still kind of lacked the knowledge of how to garden in relationship with our environment. So how can we actually understand what our weather is and what our natural system is and actually work with that so that our gardens aren't depleting our area of resources, but actually enhancing them. And that took a lot of education because a lot of people, when they think about what a garden looks like, they think of lawns, they think of roses, they think of lush green spaces. And that's not how gardens in California thrive. And since they're not thriving, people then use a lot of interventions like pesticides or fertilizers because they're like, why don't my roses look good? And they just keep adding things rather than saying, wait, maybe roses aren't the right thing to grow here. Which is why our slogan, which is not unique to us, is right plant, right place. So we're always teaching you find a plant to grow in the right location and it doesn't need a whole lot else. And so we do that by demonstrating plants that are native to our area as well as native to those other parts of the world, and show people how you can grow them beautifully. And when we were founded in 1990, there was a really big drought going on in California. And so a lot of the aim of this garden was to teach people to grow plants with less water as less of a strain on our water resources. And then while growing things with less water, we also get the opportunity to teach about how plants adapt to summer dry climates, which is really deep root systems, and I'm going to show you some slides later, different structures of the way that a plant is structured is actually water saving techniques. So it's a really fun way to teach. All right, let's see okay. So this is a picture taken in actually 1992 of the second half of our garden. And this is pretty much what the site looked like when the San Francisco League of Urban Gardeners decided to turn this into a garden. So you can see the steep slope to the right. You can see that we're on a relatively busy street. Up that street is Golden Gate Park, another 4 blocks. There's also a really vibrant family neighborhood called the Inner Sunset, which is the neighborhood I grew up in and a really lovely place for us to be located. And so our goal was to transform this into a teaching garden, and I'll show you a picture of it now. So this is on the southern side of the garden, but you essentially get the idea. The largest tree that you can see in the background up in the sky, that's a Monterey cypress tree. That's a common coastal plant in California. And that was the only plant that was here. Like that's the only original plant from when the garden was developed. And so since then, everything has been planted by us and gardened organically or regeneratively, which is a term that we're using more. Sustainable was a word that we were using a lot until as a staff, we talked about it and we were like, well, we don't really want to sustain where we're at environmentally because the status quo hasn't been great. And so we want to actually regenerate our soils and our aquifers and all of that. And so we've been using the term regenerative gardening more. Okay, so I'll take you on a little tour of the garden and use that as an opportunity to explain sort of our garden philosophy. And then I'm going to tell you more about our programs. And then I can answer some questions because it's a lot of me talking. But so this is our water-wise gardening area. The whole garden is really designed to be water-wise, but this is one of our sort of like demonstration gardens. And we're demonstrating plants that thrive in our natural environment. And the goal with this garden originally, this was sort of the first area of the garden that was developed, was to kind of sell people on the idea of drought tolerant plants, which is the term that's used. It's not really accurate because these plants aren't really drought tolerant, they're summer dry tolerant. But people call them drought tolerant. Long spells of drought can actually be challenging even for these summer dry plants because these plants are used to some level of water in the winter. They're not like desert plants. And so the idea here was to create a garden that was really beautiful to encourage people to potentially take out their lawn and put in something that looked like this. So when I take people on a tour of the garden, I show them this space and I say, okay, if this was a lawn, we would water it, say 3 times a week, every week of the year, just for rough numbers, which is about 150 times a year. This garden, which and if you have a lawn, it's not doing anything from a soil health perspective. It's not improving the soil. It's not doing anything from like a larger ecological perspective. It's not providing food or habitat for birds or any other creatures. It's really just green space. Versus this beautiful water-wise garden, which attracts a lot of beneficial insects. So if you're interested in growing food, which a lot of people are, you need a lot of beneficial insects to do that, and pollinators. It also attracts smaller birds. It does a lot for soil health. So all of those roots that are growing through the ground are breaking up our dry soil. And they are actually holding on to water. So those roots can actually keep water in our soils by acting like a sponge. Those roots also interact with each other, and there's mycorrhizal fungi and all kinds of amazing fungi that happen in the soil that add to soil health. And so they're doing all of these things underneath our feet. You can also make bouquets for your kitchen. Also, one of the amazing things about growing plants where we're located is we don't have a winter dormant season like you do in the Midwest. And so the garden actually looks like this most of the year. Like I'm actually trying to figure out what season this was taken in, and I would guess potentially fall here. But it's almost hard to say because so much of the beauty of this garden is in foliage, color, and contrast. So it's actually the foliage of the plant rather than the blooms that are making it really, really beautiful. And that foliage is not deciduous. It is evergreen. It's there all year. And then this we would water twice a month for the dry season. So that's 6 months of the year. So you're watering it 12 times a year versus 150. Plus it has all the other ecological benefits. And so that's sort of the purpose of this space. So here are 4 of the plants that we grow in our water-wise gardens that are from 4 different areas of the world. We have leucadendron, which is this top left plant, and that is from, I believe, South Africa. It's a really beautiful perennial shrub. On the right here, we have grevillea, which is a plant from Australia. This is a varietal called Ivanhoe, which I think is maybe my favorite plant in the garden. It has these, you can kind of see these like really curly little, I don't even know what part of the plant that is, to be perfectly honest. It's on the flower. Bottom right, that's New Zealand tea tree, which is a really beautiful plant as well. And then the bottom left is a tibicina, which is from I believe Peru, from South America. So we can grow plants from like a wide range of places. And these are really commonly grown plants here in coastal California. And they all do, pardon me, different things in terms of their water retention capabilities. So the tibicina on the bottom left has really fuzzy leaves. So in the morning, when there's fog or mist, those leaves can hold on to that moisture and absorb it that way. Pardon me, I'm gonna take a sip of water and cough with off camera. Hold on. Oh, I can't mute myself. Hold on, please. Okay. Other plants have like waxy leaves, which help. Sorry, I'm dealing with a cold this week. So the waxy leaves hold on to moisture in the plant and allow it to, or reduce evaporation or any other ways that a plant might lose water through heat. And so that like sort of tough exterior holds on to the moisture. Okay. So water retention and water conservation is like a really key part of what we teach at the garden. And so there's a couple of different ways that we demonstrate that. So the top left is a picture of a drip irrigation system. And so we deliver our water to our plants through this black tubing called drip irrigation. So the water is delivered directly to the plant roots. And this is important because sprinklers or other forms of delivering water really, really you can lose a lot of water to evaporation. And so drip irrigation directly delivers water to the plants and to the plant roots, and it delivers it really, really slowly. And why that is important is because we want our plant roots to develop really, really deeply so that during those periods where there's no water and no rain expected, the plant roots are really vast and deep and can actually pull water from deep, deep, deep underground. And actually the plant roots can share water between the plants, and they can pull water from different areas of the garden that might have water underground. So if we watered our plants in a shallow way rather than in a deep way, those plant roots would not get as deep. Okay, I got a throat lozenge. Let's see if this helps. Okay. The top right is a picture of our rainwater collection system. And so we actually, this is called rainwater collection. And what happens is when it rains, water flows off of the roof of buildings, and you're actually able to catch it in these large drums. And this is a really good water conservation technique for people that are located in areas where you're not going to get summer rain. And so when those water drums fill up, we can then open a tap on the bottom and use that to water our plants. The amount of water that these are holding would not be enough for us to water our entire garden. There are places in Australia, and I've seen them when I was in Central Africa, where the water drums are so large that I actually think they are able to water a lot of their spaces with the water that they collect. But for us, we're really demonstrating it as like a possible technique. And for people that live in areas where they have a home, or if you have like a school where you have really, really, really big roofs, and the ability to put in really big drums, you could actually use less of a city water and use more of the rainwater during the summer. Wow. Okay. So the bottom left and the bottom right is our sink at the garden. And this is called a gray water sink. So gray water is the idea of using water more than once. So here, when the water drains out of the sink, it actually waters these California gray rush here on the bottom right. Okay, I really hope my throat will cooperate with me. Sorry, you all. So the idea with gray water, which I actually like as a water conservation technique even more than rainwater, is the idea of reusing that water. So here, this is like a really simple system. We wash our vegetables, the water drains out and waters plants nearby. If you want to use it more on a larger scale, people can install what's called a laundry to landscape program in their houses, which is saying that like, as long as you use a clean detergent, water that's been used to launder clothing could then be rerouted to like irrigate an orchard or a backyard garden or something like that. The idea being the water is like clean enough to use again. And you can actually do this with showers as well. And the idea being like, as long as like the detergents themselves aren't harmful to plants, that water doesn't actually need to go back into our water treatment system. It can actually be used again. And that way you're essentially like getting two uses out of the same amount of water. And for California that has, we have like a reservoir system, we have to be really, really conscientious of how much water we're using. And if we could get two uses out of the same water, that would actually really make an impact on how much water citizens are using. So I actually really love gray water. It's like one of my favorite because it's really water that is being wasted by not being used to its full potential. Okay, so something else we teach about is called IPM, which when you're trying to talk about pest management, there's like no good images to use because bugs can be really unattractive, especially in a slideshow. So integrated. So in addition to water conservation, one of our other big things that we're teaching is it's called pollution prevention. But essentially what we're saying is we're not using any toxic pesticides or really any fertilizers on our site. And that's because we know that those are not really good for our soil and that we know, as ecologists, we're always thinking about sort of like the long-term and downstream effects of all of our decisions. So when you use a fertilizer, it might have short-term benefits, but the long-term effects on your plants and on your soils are not great. The same thing is true for pest management. So, there's been a lot of challenges in ecological spaces of bringing in other species, like, oh, I have this one pest, so I'm going to bring in something from somewhere else. And then suddenly you have an explosion of like whatever predator you brought in. So what we're trying to teach is, one, bugs are not bad. It's great to have bugs. The idea is that you want a lot of different kinds of bugs. So it's not great if you have an explosion of like one thing, but if you have enough of ecological diversity, then you keep all of your pest problems in check. And the way that we do that is through those flowering borders, the perennial spaces that I described in the beginning. So we get aphids on a lot of our plants, which, is a really common pest problem. And luckily, ladybugs are a natural predator for aphids. So our job is to make sure that we have plants in the garden that attract ladybugs. We also teach people other methods of pest control. So, if you're trying to grow food, making sure that sometimes that those are covered when it's cabbage moth season, Or what else do we do? Oh my gosh, all kinds of, I'm going to show you some really cool row covers that we actually built for the garden to keep out raccoons and rats, which are a really big problem when you're gardening in a city. But really what we're trying to teach is that pest management isn't an individual pest by pest problem. It's creating a diverse environment to keep all living creatures coming to the garden and naturally keeping each other in check. So these are actually those row covers that I was mentioning. They were designed by a garden friend, and they are really beautiful, and they have 1/4-inch gopher wire mesh on them, and they fold up on themselves so that people can actually, lean inside and garden, but they keep out sort of our larger pests. We're located, as I mentioned, in the middle of the city. Coyotes have been seen in our neighborhood. We know we have raccoons. Raccoons are really frustrating because they love to just like mess things up. They'll like come through and just like tear things out of the beds and then like walk away. We're like, I don't even know if you ate any of the stuff that you ripped out. I think you were just messing with our stuff. So these have been really helpful. So we grow food in the garden. We have about 20 raised beds. And we grow food because people really love to grow food. People really love to learn how to grow food. And so it's kind of like a great in to teach people about the environment. Someone once told me that we teach kids about polar bears so that because polar bears are really cute. And then when you learn to love a polar bear, you start to care about like bigger ecological issues. And I kind of feel that way about growing food. Like people really want to learn how to grow a carrot. And if I can teach them how to grow a carrot and then teach them how that fits into like a larger system, like ecological environmental system, will kind of pull them in. And so we grow food in all of our raised beds, and then every Saturday, groups of volunteers harvest that food, wash it, and prepare a little box, and then that box is sent off to a local shelter. So you can see some people here harvesting. One of the challenges of growing, so one of the benefits, I should start with the benefits of growing in our summer dry climate is that we can grow food year round. Because it doesn't freeze in San Francisco, like leafy greens, radishes, carrots, beets essentially grow year round. It also means that we can't grow what are considered to be a lot of the classic summer crops: tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, corn are pretty much, we could grow some of them, but they would be really, really difficult. They're not really designed for our climate. So you can kind of see the boxes that we put together every week, and then some volunteers harvesting. So the heart of the garden and the heart of what we do is our 3-bin compost system. So we've taught compost education since 1990. It's pretty much like the most important thing that we teach. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, because soil health is so important to us, and we know that compost is the most important thing you can do to improve your soil. And also because it really fits in with this idea of zero waste. So we're really lucky in San Francisco to have municipal composting. So every single person that lives in the city has a green bin in addition to their trash and recycling. And so they're able to put in green waste and have it taken away and processed. And I've been to the facility that does that, and it's beautiful. It's really good product. But it's carted away, somewhere, sometimes 50 plus miles, and decomposed off-site, and then they distribute that around. What's really amazing about doing compost on-site is that it's a closed loop system. So everything that goes into our compost bin was grown by us, and then all that compost goes back into our garden. And so we're actually building our soil with our own material, and we're not having to use fossil fuels to move it off-site. It's also a really amazing teaching tool. And it's kind of magic to see the process of it going from being chopped up debris into beautiful black gold, which is what people call compost. We also have worm bins and we teach worm composting as well. That's a key thing. So we teach composting to youth, and then we have a free composting class every month. And so that's what some people on the right are doing. So one of our big challenges is that we're located on a hill, and for gardening, that is a really unique challenge. So the way that we've worked with that is we keep our orchard trees up on our slope. And so they hold in soil, so they prevent erosion. And then it's also a really great way for us to grow some fruit. San Francisco is a challenging place for growing some fruit because of our low chill hours. So our previous director was really interested in apples. So we grow a number of different apple varieties to see what does okay with the low chill hours. We also grow plums and pears, loquats, which is a fruit tree, I believe, from native to Taiwan. They're almost like apricot fruits. They're really delicious, but they have a lot of pits in them. They sometimes can have 5 pits per fruit, which is kind of mind-boggling. We have a pomegranate tree, cherry trees. So we grow a number of different things. And it also allows us to teach fruit tree pruning classes, which are pretty popular. Oh, and we grow lemons. Lemons are probably the easiest fruit to grow in San Francisco. There's actually an organization here in the city that's trying to make San Francisco lemon independent. Like, what if we could grow all of the lemons that we ever needed in our city? Like, how cool would that be? Mm-hmm. So, apologies. The other thing we're doing with our sloped hillside is this is where we grow a lot of our native plants. So native plants are a really important part of our garden. And we have kind of 3 locations we're growing them. One is on a pathway at the top of the hill. We also have a native plant backyard, kind of showing like, if you had a backyard space, how would you design that space with plants that are native to California? And then the other is on our sloped hillside. So you'll see these volunteers. So you'll notice there's these kind of like, they're called berms. So essentially it's burlap stuffed with straw. And then we stake that. And what it does is it holds the hillside in, and then we pack the back end with native soil and we plant native plants in that soil. Eventually that burlap and straw will decompose, but by that time the plants will have gotten large enough that their root systems will actually hold in the soil themselves, acting as a natural erosion control. And we've also always had this one chunk of the hillside that's been kind of our wild native area. We have a lot of ceanothus and coyote bush and other natives up there. And the idea being that like gardens are very cultivated spaces. They're not natural spaces. Like they have very much a human element to them, which is not a bad thing. But we try and have a part of the hill have as little human interaction as possible so that birds and bees and other animals have their own habitat, because we also really want to be bringing as much as of our urban nature into our garden as possible. We want birds of all sizes. We want creatures of all sizes, maybe not the raccoons, but it's okay. We want all of those in our garden. And the way that one of the best ways we can do that is by growing native plants that have evolved with our local ecology. Trina, who's one of our staff members, is really, really passionate about native plants. And so she has, we've always had native gardens, and now they're just even more amazing and more beautiful because of her work. And now we're actually working with our local chapter of the Native Plant Society, and our interns are removing, like, certain plants are so prolific that we're a small space. We don't need all of them. So, on Saturday, some interns were taking out California aster, potting them up, and then we will give those to the Native Plant Society, and they'll plant them in other gardens around the city as a way to sort of proliferate native plants. So this to me is like very exciting work. We're also, and this is kind of geeky, but you guys are environmentalists, so you'll appreciate, we're working with an organization that's in our neighborhood. There is a butterfly called the green hair streak that is nearly extinct, and we're trying to help bring it back. So this other organization has been able to bring back some of the green hair streak butterfly. The host plant is called California coastal buckwheat. So we have it in our garden, and we're actually trying to create another colony space at our site. And there's also the pipevine swallowtail, which is a similar story butterfly. So we just put in a pipevine, California pipevine, as an effort to attract the pipevine swallowtail to our garden. So there's just a lot of layers to this work and to these partnerships. So top left, that's the California coastal buckwheat. That is not a green hair streak butterfly. That's a bumblebee. But the goal is we'll have this photo with it's the tiniest bright green butterfly. Top right is a mimulus, which so mimulus is, I mean, California natives are kind of interesting plants because, as I mentioned, we don't have winters like you all do, but our late summer is essentially our plants' winter because it's their dormant season. So essentially it hasn't rained since May. So these plants, you know, they have these deep root systems. They're pulling water from all over the garden. But at some point, the water has become really scarce. And these plants, the native plants, we don't give additional water to. So other parts of the garden with plants from other parts of the world will continue watering throughout that dry season. We don't do that to California plants because they're actually really adapted to not get water during those months. But that means that in September, a lot of these plants have lost their leaves or look frankly terrible. And that's because they're in their dormancy, because they're trying to survive that very end of dry season until around Halloween when we start to get rain again. So mimulus, sticky monkey is called, is like a really beautiful flower. And then if you came in like mid-September, you'd be like, why are you growing this stick? It's terrible looking. And that's why. Bottom left is yarrow, which is a really common native you'll see. And then bottom right is ceanothus, California lilac. And this is a picture from our native backyard. And in, you know, it's just starting to bloom now, but our whole hillside will be purple like that. But we have different varietals, so they bloom at slightly different times. It's really show-stopping and amazing. So that's kind of the garden. There's so many things that I didn't show you. We have bees, a shade garden, all different areas. But as you can tell, my throat's kind of giving out, and also I can only talk for so long. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about like how we teach people. So our whole mission is to be a teaching garden. And we do that in a variety of different ways. So as I mentioned, last year, we taught 49 public workshops. This is an educator named Hannah Schulman, who's really amazing, teaching a workshop. Actually, this is a bouquet making workshop. So we teach a wide range of classes. We teach urban composting every month of the year, and it's free. We teach a grow your own food class 6 times a year, and that's like a basic how to grow food. We teach a 1-day, like, how do I garden class, like an intro 101, and it's really rooted a lot in learning how to garden in our space in San Francisco. So learning about weather, learning about soil, water, all those kinds of things. We teach beekeeping classes, pruning classes, IPM classes, all kinds of things. Oh, very sensitive. And then we teach 3-week training, like 3-week classes. So like Introduction to Sustainable Gardening, part 1, 2, 3. And then we have a 6-week growing food class that happens every spring. So that'll start a week from Saturday. And so we teach a wide range of classes, pretty much all introductory. And what I really like about these workshops is that we hire experts to teach them. So occasionally they're taught by our staff, but typically they're taught by other people that are experts in this. We teach rainwater harvesting, and that's taught by a woman named Kat Sawyer. Kat Sawyer runs an amazing organization that does all kinds of education around water conservation. We teach classes from arborists or local gardeners or people that work at, you know, local gardening stores. So it like really is a great way to bring in expert voices and like different voices to teach our workshops. So we have 2 classrooms in the garden. This is our south classroom. And so those are like just a really core part of what we do. We teach youth. So we have a field trip program. Roughly 35 classes every year come to the garden for a 2.5-hour trip. They do a wide range of things. We used to only teach 4th and 5th graders. And that's because the funding for this program was aimed at that age group. That's when they learned about California history. During the pandemic, when we came back from the pandemic, so many teachers were like overwhelmed and unable to take their classes on a field trip. And so we ended up expanding our age group for teaching field trips. And I'm so glad that we did, because now we're teaching kindergarten through high school. It's still mostly elementary school, but it's really fun to take our gardening concepts and amend them for different age groups. And so they'll do things like right now they're planting, they'll work on the compost. They do a really fun thing where Hannah gives them like, you know, like paint samples that you get like the paint store, and they have to go around the garden and find something that's that exact color of red or that exact color yellow or whatever. That's really fun. They do like plant bingo, all kinds of fun stuff in the garden. And really our goal with this program is to create lifelong environmental lovers. Like we just want them to fall in love with nature. And so we really hope that the garden is just like a really wonderful break in their week. The other thing we do is we host twice a week volunteer hours. And volunteers are really key to helping us maintain our garden. You know, we're a half acre, which isn't huge, but it's amazing how much work there can be. We have so many distinct gardens within that half acre. And so the volunteers are like a key component of that. Also, we don't have a chipper to make compost. So everything we make for our compost is chopped by hand, which is what the people are doing on the right, which is a tremendous amount of work, and we couldn't do without volunteers. The sort of like other side of that is that our volunteer hours are, it's really, as an educator, it's very hands-on, like they're very educational. So we spend a lot of time with our volunteers, teaching them. So it's not just like, okay, weed this oxalis, but it's like, why? What's the goal of that? Like, what's the reason? What's our long-term vision for this space? We really want people to understand the sort of like why behind every ask of them, which is wonderful. And also just means that like, it takes a lot of educators to do that. But we want volunteer hours to feel like people left having learned something. And the other thing that's really important to me about our volunteer program, and really all of our programs, but we say that the work that we're doing is we're building community, and the gardening is the medium for that. So like the real work is actually the community building, not getting anything done. And I'm always trying to remind people like there's no outcome we're looking for at the end of the day. Like with gardening, you're never done. Like you will never, ever be done. There's always more to do. And so sometimes, you know, we all sit together and people bring a bagged lunch and we're all talking and hanging out at lunch. And what I love about it is it's like such a wide age range. You know, we have high schoolers completing volunteer hours, retirees, we have such a wide age range, and everybody's talking about life experiences or whatever. And sometimes the staff will be like, okay, like, do we need to get back to work? And sometimes we really do. Like, we pulled out all the compost and we have to put it back. But sometimes I'm like, no, like let's let everybody keep talking. Like this is the goal. Like this is the point of the whole thing. It's not the other stuff. And so that's something I just love about our work is it just brings so many different people from the community together in a time and space that they probably wouldn't interact otherwise. And then like sort of my passion project program, the thing that I love the most is our 3-month gardening and composting educator training program called Get Up. So this was founded in 1996, and every year it trains 20 to 25 garden educators and composting educators. And so essentially, the idea is we can't teach everybody the importance of gardening and composting and the threats that climate change are posing and issues of food justice and social justice. Like we can't reach everybody. And if we tried to go into every community and teach that, we might not be the most effective messengers. But if we bring people to the garden from those communities, train them, and then they go back into their communities and then therefore train more people, almost like a dandelion seed effect of like spreading knowledge through community members, then we can actually reach a lot more people, and that message will be from within the community itself rather than us dogmatically telling people. So this program is 3 months. It's 19 classes and it's 90 hours of work. And every class is taught by a different person, and we bring a huge range of voices. It's very diverse, diverse in terms of like ethnic and racial diversity, but also diversity of viewpoint and approach. With the idea being that we want the students, and so to be clear, these are adults. We had one high school student once. She was amazing. She's now at UC Berkeley, gonna change the world. But it ranges in age from like 22-year-olds to 75-year-olds, 80-year-olds. And then they take these classes. Each one is taught by a different person. And then they also, a lot of people are in a place where they want to change their career and are taking this to sort of like learn more about the environmental career sphere. And so each of their guest instructors kind of explains how they got their job and what they do as a way to show the wide range of things that you can do with this kind of knowledge, whether that's running your own gardening business or working on state policy, to running a nonprofit, to like working at a flower center, to running a school garden. Like there's so many different things that you can do. And so this program kind of like trains and educates people and introduces them to that network. I think I said a lot of this, but so it started in 1996. We've had over 800 people graduate from that program. This thing on the right shows, this is an old sign that we had in the garden and showed places that graduates of that program went on to either found or play a large role in. What's really wild is that so many of these places don't exist anymore. And even since in the last 12 years, since I've been at GFE, we've lost so many organizations like this due to so many different factors. Funding, a big one is land. So we're really lucky to be on city land. So our land is pretty safe in terms of like, no, it's not going to be sold and developed or something like that, but that is really common. Some of these are small farms that have moved on or whatever. So it is really wild to see how much that landscape has changed in the Bay Area, especially as the Bay Area has been gentrified in the last 20 years. But you know, classes range from like soil, water, and compost. We have food justice. We talk about land use, who has access to land, what happens with that land. And then a big key component is we teach them how to teach, because they're going to go on and teach a public composting class at the garden. And then they'll also complete a 40-hour service project at a local organization. So we introduce them to other organizations that are doing amazing work. And so after they graduate from the program, they'll either go to one of those organizations and do 40 hours of service, or they'll do it with us, which is also really great. And that program is funded. So the students pay a program cost. It's a sliding scale, but it averages about 20% of the cost of the program. And a lot of that funding comes from the city of San Francisco. And I think it's just amazing that the city wants to fund gardening and composting educators. And to be fair, these educators have gone on to do like really amazing things around the city. They've run city departments, they've worked on policy, they've started nonprofits, they've done really important work. They've also just been sort of the heartbeat behind the gardening and environmental movement in the Bay Area, which is pretty strong, but I think it is really strong because of Get Up. This is the first Get Up class, 1996, which just makes me happy to think about how long it's been. And then this is one of our more recent years group of students. And that's all I had prepared to say. I'm really grateful to be able to talk about our work. I'm happy to answer questions. But I'm just really grateful for Cody for inviting me to share about GFE. I'm so proud of the work that we do and very, very honored to lead this organization. And very grateful that you wanted to listen to me talk about it for so long tonight. And that's my contact information. You can also visit our website and find out more about us. And then we're also on Instagram, but I am our social media manager. And so in addition to all the other work I do, so I post intermittently, I would say.
Well, thank you, Maggie. I have a question. Your program reminds me of a 1970 program by the Fairlonas Institute.
Mm.
Are you familiar with that, or is this
No.
As I remember it, it was a joint project, I think, with the University of California, architect Sin Van Duren, and the laboratory was involving can a family of four support itself energy-wise as well as food-wise environment.
That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that was happening in the 1970s, because that was like when you kind of look at the back to the land movements. We have an area of our garden called the Victory Garden, which is named after the gardens that were developed and people were encouraged to develop during World Wars I and II as a way to sort of help the nation's food supply. The idea was that like all this food that was being produced by American farms was being sent to soldiers overseas. And so Eleanor Roosevelt and other people asked ordinary Americans to grow more food at home and on school sites and other public land. And about 40% of the food was grown in those spaces during World War II. And I know that in the 1970s was another sort of back to the land Victory Garden movement time. And then it happened again around the economic crash of 2008. So I wonder if it was also kind of related to that, given the time period.
Maggie, I have a couple of questions. One has to do with your curriculum or planning.
Yeah.
Are you responsible to any other organization as to topics that you need to cover for a particular group, like children, versus maybe somebody that's an adult going into master gardening or something?
Got it. So you're like, are we beholden to anybody for our curriculum?
Right.
So it kind of depends on who funds our workshops. So the Public Utilities Commission, which is our biggest funder and our landowner, they're really focused on pollution prevention and water conservation, which, you know, is pest management and water conservation. So all of the workshops that they fund They don't really oversee our curriculum in terms of like, I don't have to have any curriculum approved by them, but we really do need to be talking about those key points. The good thing is that their work is so aligned with our work. Like, even if they didn't fund those workshops, and even the workshops that they don't fund, we still talk about water conservation, because like we can't do our work without talking about those things. And then in terms of the other, like there's no other funder that I have that really weighs in. Our other largest funder, which is the city department, which is the zero waste funding. They really want us to talk about composting and zero waste, but again, that's something that we're so well versed in. And they don't have like a heavy hand in like reviewing our curriculum. So a lot of our curriculum, especially like the Get Up program curriculum, has changed a lot over the years. And that has been a lot of it's been informed by feedback we've gotten from students. And then as a staff, like, what do we want to change? What do we want to see? And how can we push ourselves forward? And I would say the biggest curriculum change is talking more about the impacts of climate change. And so we talk now a lot about how we in urban environments and urban gardeners can help with climate change mitigation. And one of the big ways that we teach that is through carbon sequestration, so that like our plants naturally pull carbon from the air and store it in their root systems. And so perennial plants will do that naturally. And so our work teaching people about planting perennials that do well in summer dry climates then feeds into carbon sequestration, which then helps to mitigate climate change. So I hope that answers your question, but overall, we don't have a lot of people overseeing our curriculum besides us.
Great. And one more question, being that you're so close to the ocean, how does salt affect your growing season or the ground?
You know,
Or
yeah. It doesn't affect us tremendously. I think if you live, like for people that live a couple blocks from the beach, I would imagine that it would have like that it could have an effect. For us, the bigger factor is wind and fog. So wind is actually really hard because wind is very drying. So for a summer dry climate, having a lot of wind can be very drying on your plants. And so all the more reason that we have to be growing plants that are really tough. As I mentioned, we're on the west side of Twin Peaks. If you go to the east side of Twin Peaks, which is a neighborhood called like Noe Valley or the Mission District, it's much warmer there. They can grow, they have a much easier time even growing like tomatoes than we do. And so it's funny how there's like so many microclimates in San Francisco. So I would say that salt is not the biggest factor, but that wind and fog are much, much bigger factors that the ocean impacts our garden in particular.
thanks.
Am I heard? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Susan's my wife. She's on the board and she's there. I'm at home. About 10 or more than 10 years ago, Susan and I, we got into a composting project through BP of all places. Yeah, that was really funny. It's our introduction to the SAVE organization. Anyways, quick question. When we got the worms for worm composting, what is it called?
Vermicomposting.
Thank you. We got some from a guy from your area the company was called monsterworms.org or whatever.
Oh.
Did you ever hear? This could have been old. You never heard of
monster worms. I know Sonoma Valley Worm Company is where we've been getting them. And then I've been getting so many community members emailing me lately telling me that they're trying to get distribute their worms because their worm bins are overflowing. So actually we've been able to keep them to the city, but.
So if we needed some worms, we could call you and then you could connect us to somebody who is a reasonable price for them or something like that.
Yeah. Or I would imagine that there's worms I would imagine that other people are doing vermicomposting in your area and you might be able to get them more locally.
Well, actually we had 60 bins that we actually was part of.
Oh my gosh. If you need that many worms, I think Sonoma Valley Worm Company is probably a good one.
Yeah, that's cool. Again, we got the grant by chance we just looked for, are there other grants for community gardening that you know of? Is there a
Oh my
certain
gosh.
site? There's lots of them probably, right?
There are, but I have found them really difficult. It's really been difficult for us to access them for a couple of different reasons. One, the nationwide grants, which is probably, the grant, like if you and I are applying for similar grants, it would be a nationwide grant. There's just a lot of competition.
Oh,
And there's a lot of gardening projects in San Francisco. And so there's a lot of competition even within San Francisco. And also the neighborhood that we're located in, it's sort of like a middle class neighborhood in San Francisco, as a really large Asian American community and Russian American community, but we're not considered to be a lower income community in San Francisco. And so because of that, we don't qualify for a lot of the grants, or we're not given first priority because of the population that we work with.
well, I enjoyed your presentation. I'm glad you
Oh,
did.
good.
Our son David lives in Long Beach, and he works with Honda developing the hydrogen fuel cell for cars,
Cool.
battery storage. So keep that in mind if you need a speaker. His name's David Korzinski. We're really proud of him. He's been
Oh,
working for Honda. He just came back from Japan last week.
cool.
Okay, just
Thank
that.
you.
This is the parent patting him on the back.
My
Thank you.
parents are the same way.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Maggie, you said you had 2.5 paid employees.
Yeah.
What are their jobs?
Okay. So I'm the director, and I'm 32 hours a week. And then one of our program managers, so she does adult public programs. She manages all of our workshops, and she manages our Get Up Garden training program. She's full-time. Chris is 32 hours a week. He's a program manager, and he manages the volunteer program and the youth program. And then Hannah, who works, it ranges, but about I think about 6 hours a week. And she supports the youth program, and then she supports the volunteer program too.
Now, the teachers that come for the summer and teach classes, are those teachers like committed like every year, or are
Oh.
they different all the time, or what?
Good question. So I think maybe you're referring to so the Get Up Teachers, which is a fall program. They change kind of every year. So there's some people that have been teaching for many years, but we're always trying to bring in new voices. So that kind of ranges. And then I have California has some new contractor laws thanks to Lyft and Uber, who now are exempt from the very laws that were developed to rein them in. But anyway. So I have contracts with 2 of my teachers that teach really, really regularly for us, but otherwise they're just paid on they're paid on a case by case basis because, we have such a range of teachers. Sometimes like there's a few teachers that teach maybe 12 or 14 times a year for us, and then other teachers that teach once or twice. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have children coming in all year? Do they come in with classes by any chance?
Yeah, so the field trip program, the kids come in, it's like during the fall and the spring. So I think our first trip is usually in like early October and then goes until early December. And then the spring trips start in early February and go through end of May. And those trips are all funded by the PUC, the people that own our land. They're the ones that fund those field trips. We do offer, like, we will do field trips for schools that want to pay out of pocket. And we charge them like a discounted rate, and it's still expensive for them. I think it's about 500. It's like $500 for a 2.5 hour trip. Plus they have to get themselves there. And so occasionally we'll teach maybe like another 5 field trips a year on that way. Developing a summer program has always been something I've been interested in, but for us, and we could, it could be like a really good way for us to, bring in some money to do a program that really fits within our mission. But it's a pretty big project to take on in terms of like a lot of curriculum planning, just a lot of logistical planning. And then like liability, like I think we would have, you know, all that insurance covers, but it makes me as a director pretty nervous because it's just a pretty complicated program for us to develop. I'm currently working on developing a new self-guided tour. So currently we have signs around the garden that kind of tell you about a lot of the things I talked about tonight. But those were made about 12 years ago. So I've been working on developing some new signage because my hope is that you could bring your class to the garden on a trip, but you wouldn't either like if you didn't qualify for a field trip or you didn't want to pay to have us teach one, you could still walk your students around the garden, learn through the signage, and then the signs will each have a QR code that'll take you to a web page that'll give you more information. And I think about this a lot with like high school students. High schoolers are not an age range that we reach to the degree that I would like to. I feel like high school was when I became very interested in social justice. I think high schoolers are very passionate about the environment and about right and wrong and like thinking about their future. And I really feel like that's a demographic I would like to reach more. But because it's not something we have funding for, I would love for there to be ways for high school teachers to bring students to the garden and really get a lot out of the experience, even if we didn't have to be there.
Well, thank you, Maggie. We're gonna have to be winding up this session here. Did we all learn something? Did we like what Maggie had to say, et cetera?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And there will be another lecture here on April 9th, and it's Conservation in Northwest Ohio. And protecting what's left and restoring what's been lost as far as wetlands, et cetera. So that'll be our last one, and then our awards night is May 13th, May 14th. May 14th, so you're invited to any of those opportunities in that, and we just thank you for coming this evening, and I hope you learned a lot.